the purpose of this video is to capture sufficient visions of our cruising tour to help us in the future relive the great experience we had, not only in viewing the splendors of the Alaska and Yukon Territory, but in doing so with Bob and Jennifer and Len and Betty, who we love dearly. We know that no matter how hard one might try, no video or picture can recreate the beauty and splendor of Alaska and the Yukon Territory. It is our hope then that all who view this video will already have, or will have in the future, the opportunity to experience the wonders of this part of our great country. Now to the itinerary. We started our Holland American cruise tour in Seattle, where we boarded a tour bus which took us directly to the pier in Vancouver, British Columbia, where our ship, the Volendam, was docked. We departed Vancouver at 5 p.m. and traveled through the Inside Passage to Juneau, Alaska, where we spent the afternoon touring the town. We departed that evening for Skagway, Alaska, and arrived the next morning. After disembarking the ship, we toured the city and stayed the night in Skagway. The next morning, we traveled on a narrow-gauge train over White Pass Summit into Canada's Yukon Territory. Our narrow-gauge train was met at Fraser by a 60-foot luxury motor coach that took us to Whitehorse, which is the capital of Canada's Yukon Territory. We spent the night in Whitehorse. Then it was back on the motor coach, which followed the Alaskan Highway to Beaver Creek. We spent the night in Beaver Creek. Then it was back on our motor coach and headed for Fairbanks. We stayed 2 days in Fairbanks. Then we took the Alaska Railroad to Denali National Park. We toured the park and then overnighted in a lodge. Had fun the next morning, and then the next afternoon we boarded the train for Anchorage. We spent that evening and the next day in Anchorage. We departed at noon the following day for home. Betty and Len flew to Seattle, whereas Jennifer and Bob and Lois and I flew to Oakland. And now for the highlights of that trip.
Okay, good.
When that's on, that's good.
Tell me when to shut it off.
Right. Thank
All
you
set?
so much.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your cruise director, Dave Ross. A brief remarks about this evening's activities. So far, the clock is on 5:45 taking place. As we speak, we are sailing away from the beautiful port of Vancouver, British Columbia, and we have our sailing festivities taking place on Lido Deck Aft with the great music of the Sea Breeze Quartet. Some great fun with the cruise staff as well as the drink special of the afternoon.
Well, here we are, just going under the Lions Bridge. And there comes the pilot boat coming alongside. Well, we just stood there and enjoyed the sights and sounds as we left the harbor.
It's recording right at the moment. For how long, I don't know. Get as much as we can.
Well, we're going to have fun anyways.
You better believe it.
Well, as Jennifer said, we're going to have lots of fun even if my camera is malfunctioning. Well, we walked around the deck, went down to our room, and had a nice welcome aboard daily program. And it said it would be casual dress that night, and here we are in the dining room. The weather was good for us as we departed from Vancouver. And that evening, After dinner, we went to a show, and we went off to bed. Got up the next day, and it was Tuesday, and we're going to be at sea today, traveling the Inside Passage. Tonight, we're going to go to the captain's reception. It's formal tonight. Well, it's out on the deck, just kind of walking around, enjoying the sights. Beautiful day. And then one of the first things on the day's agenda was to tour through the kitchen. Now, we were told that there's a kitchen staff of 98 that prepare the food for 1,440 guests and almost 640 crew members. They use 440 pounds of fresh fish at one dinner setting. Blows your mind, and the amounts of meat, produce, and eggs are just astronomical. They even told us that they'd make about 120 loaves of bread and 400 dinner rolls per day. Well, after that, later on, we went to a Royal High Tea. Beautiful low-calorie items there. And then it was get ready for the evening captain's reception. So let's go, shall we?
Ready for the captains. You going to go see the captain, Jennifer?
Yes, I am.
You are, huh? What you going to tell him?
He's doing a fine job of running the ship.
Good.
It's been pretty smooth so far, and we're having a really good time.
That's good. What are you going to tell him?
The same thing. I agree.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to ask him who's running the ship.
Yeah, well, he's there. And there's son.
I know.
Well, yeah, hi.
Happy cruise ship.
Thank you for having me.
Just win again.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome aboard. Let's make a big smile here. Anyone there? There you have it.
Thank you
Have
very
a
much.
happy cruise.
Is that we will do our utmost to make your cruise a dream of a vacation. I hope you meet all your expectations and that you always will have fond memories of this cruise on board the Volendam. We wish you a bon appetit, or as we say in Dutch, eet smakelijk.
Ladies and gentlemen, the commander of the vessel, Captain Hans van Goyal. Senior officers, hostess, and employee of the month. Well, as the captain did mention, there is a delicious dinner awaiting you in the Rotterdam dining room. To reach the Rotterdam dining room, simply take deck 5 all the way to the back of the ship.
Well, this is the photo that the ship's photographer took of Jennifer, Bob, and the captain. And here we are at dinner that evening. And there's Betty and Len in front of an ice carving, which was there right in the restaurant. Well, I was off to a show, to bed, and we got up the next morning. It's Wednesday. And today we will be sailing into Juneau. We should arrive around 1 p.m. and we'll depart at 11 p.m. So let's go out on deck. As you can see, it was another nice day. Well, there are a lot of things on the agenda to do today. One of them was to go to the disembarkation talk, which we did. And the cruise director had some real funnies about questions that passengers ask of the crew members. So listen to what he had to say.
11 o'clock, of course. Number 6, what do they do with the ice carvings after they've melted? Number 5, is the TV reception satellite or cable? Long cable from Vancouver. Number 4, will this elevator take me to the front of the ship? Number 3, what is our current elevation?
Okay.
It's sea level. Number 2, this is a good one. Do the crew sleep on board? Actually asked. And the number 1 silliest question we believe that has ever been asked on a Holland America Line ship, it was actually asked in the photo gallery. How do I know which picture is mine?
Well, after that talk, we went out on deck and enjoyed the sights as we approached Juneau. Now, Juneau is Alaska's capital. The city's namesake, Joe Juneau, came here in 1880 searching for gold, and having found it, the town now bears his name. Today, Juneau is the 3rd largest city with a population of but 30,000. That, by the way, is one of Holland American's sister ship, which is there. Let's go have some lunch, shall we?
Do the best. Yeah, yes, it's on and running for a change. Pretty good food there, huh? Good.
That's the final place. Hi.
Yeah.
More food with that.
You're ready to eat, huh?
Here we're coming in to dock.
Okay, have fun. Bye.
Hey, how are you, mate? How's it going?
There's the main downtown street. Well, there's the famous Red Dog Saloon. Its location has actually been moved a few times.
So you going in?
We're thinking about it.
Okay, let's go. Okay.
And everybody's here.
Boy, it's crowded in here, and is it dark.
I don't see it.
But look here. This is a sign that we got the biggest kick out of. We're now looking at the Nordam. We're actually out on a street that just parallels the dock area. That's our ship.
I saw one leave when you were...
There's where all the seaplanes take off.
I don't remember sitting on the ship and there were like...
There's more seaplanes in Alaska per capita than any other place in the world. The seaplanes actually tied right up to our ship. They had a little floating platform out there, and they called it the seaplane terminal. So if you'd booked a flight, you'd take right off from there.
Another ship coming in. I believe that's the Princess. Been following along behind us.
Gee, the flowers there were just beautiful. But of course, in August, they get 16 hours of daylight. On the longest day, June 21st, they get 18 hours. But on December 21st, only 6 hours and 21 minutes. On that day, they said the sun rises at 8:46 and sets at 3:07. Now, a gentleman there told us to go down to the bridge and see the salmon that are spawning going upstream.
You see a lot of gulls that are after these fish. You can see these fish down here.
These are salmon going back to spawn.
Trying to get upstream. Those are big. Oh man, I feel sorry for him though.
Yeah. Look at that one, still fighting when they go up.
As I remember, by Mendenhall, there was a river where they were all red.
Yeah, I can remember the red.
Well, look at there's a couple up on the cement trying to see them.
We're now on the other side of the bridge, and here you can see the fish. They're coming in from the bay.
This goes out into the bay.
Well, here we are, just enjoying the storefronts there in Juneau. Oh, has seen this sign in a storefront window, and so guess what? We went in, and guess what? We bought this quilt for our bedroom.
Take your nice quilt.
That's
and
right.
what
Enjoy.
did you call it?
Laura's wedding ring.
Laura's, okay, that's
You'll like
good.
it.
All right. And you said the weather's been here good like this for 6 months?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
You brought it with, and you're probably going to take it home.
Right on, okay. Bye-bye, thank you. Bye.
Here Lois is getting a bear
There
hug.
she is.
Well, then we went out to the Mendenhall Glacier, which is only 13 miles from downtown Juneau. That's the visitor center. Had some very interesting displays. Gave you a good insight on that natural wonder. It's so stated that that river of ice actually flows 12 miles from the coast mountains. And the Mendenhall Glacier is one of several glaciers flowing from the Juneau ice field, which is a 1,500 square mile lake of ice in the mountains behind Juneau. They also had on display some glacial ice that they'd taken there from the glacier. And it's so stated that it was between 80 and 150 years old. And it could take all day for that small piece of ice that you'll see here to melt because of its extreme density. Then it was back to the ship. Now, Bob and Jennifer, they did some more shopping, and they came across the Aleuts here, some natives there who were doing their traditional dances, cute little kids. Well, then that evening it was to dinner, and at 11 o'clock we went to this Indonesian show. So, we'll see you there.
Well, good evening once again, everyone, and thank you all very much for staying up. This is well worth it. This is a wonderful show, and I am sure that you will definitely believe the same thing by the end of the show. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage the Master of Ceremonies for tonight's Indonesian Cruise Show. Please welcome one of your dining room stewards, Nazir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Master of Ceremony tonight. Proudly welcome you to Indonesian Cruise Show. So all of the participants of the show are not the professional one, but we're gonna try our best. So totally different from what we've seen a couple nights ago, maybe by the cast member. They are all professional because all of us has different functions here. Yeah, all your dining room stewards, some of the wine stewards, but we're gonna do our best for you tonight.
Closer
West Java Bamboo Orchestra.
Exactly right.
Yet they did take some time out of their own personal time to put this show together, and I certainly hope all of you appreciated that. Please help me in giving a very special thank you to the Master of Ceremonies, our dining room steward, Nazir. And at this time, we would like to close with a very special song entitled Indonesia Ku. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave you with the Indonesian crew on board the Volendam.
Well, here it is, Thursday morning, and we're going to be disembarking our ship today here at Skagway, and we'll be starting our land portion of our cruise tour. Now, just to again go over where we've been, we left Vancouver, took a 3-night inside passage cruise. We were there yesterday in Juneau for part of the day, and today we'll be here in Skagway. So let's go have some breakfast. Guess who's here eating? You want me to show the plates? Better not, right? Well, we're in Skagway, huh? Really pretty here. You've had breakfast and now you're getting ready to go ashore? Well, let's just walk up forward and get our first glimpse of Skagway. By the way, this ship was built in November of last year and has a guest capacity of 1,440. And there's Skagway. Pretty little town. And that's a Princess Cruises ship. tied up here in the harbor? Well, it's time that we go down and get on our bus.
Good morning.
Morning.
Are you enjoying that cruise?
Yes.
Good. Now, you were in Juneau yesterday, correct?
Yep.
All right. All right. This is Broadway Street that we're on right now. I'm going to turn off of it, but you can just kind of look down the street and you will notice that this is where all the action is.
We then went up on this hill, which overlooked the harbor and the town. Our next stop was at the Gold Rush Cemetery, where the famous Soapy Smith is buried. Now listen to the story of Soapy Smith.
Structure was once headquarters of all the mayhem and crime. It was the saloon of one Jefferson Soapy Smith, a con man who literally ran the town. Smith and his gang of thieves and murderers were adept at separating gold from the pockets of anyone who had it. A visiting Mountie reported that neither law or order prevailed in Skagway. Robbery and murder were daily occurrences. Soapy Smith's crime spree in Skagway lasted less than a year, but he's not forgotten. Soapy's story is retold every summer day in the days of '98.
We went to this show that night, had an awfully good time, a lot of laughs. Ahead of time.
Experiment in my own laboratory. Use the soap upon your skin and it will glow like the moon. Your face will shine with the radiance of 1,000 candles. Is that bald spot growing, sir?
On July 7th, 1898, Soapy Smith met his end in a shootout with town surveyor Frank Reed. Reed was also fatally wounded. Both are buried in Skagway's Gold Rush Cemetery. Soapy was buried an outcast. Frank Reed, a hero. The tombstones in the Gold Rush Cemetery are a reminder of the struggles faced by Skagway's pioneers. Their names will forever be associated with the great stampede to the Klondike.
That's quite a cemetery. And then we headed back to the town. Now, Skagway has but one main street, Broadway, and that's exactly what we're on. Those little houses there are houses of ill repute. Hey, who's that?
Is that the family totem pole land?
Family tree.
Family tree, okay. Look at that, all the way up.
Well, it was about lunchtime, and Lois and I went into this little cafe to have a sandwich. And let me tell you, I was taken back at their air conditioning system. What do you think of that? Well, from there, we went out and just walked down the street. You know, the weather was really neat. Looked in the store windows. Betty and Len and Jennifer and Bob, they were somewhere in town doing their thing. And guess what? Look who we ran into at the cross-stitch gallery.
We're at the cross-stitchery. Well, pretty good, huh?
We were told that today Skagway looks much the same as it did during the Gold Rush era. Now this is the Arctic Brotherhood Hall, constructed in 1899, and it's decorated with more than 10,000 pieces of driftwood. By the way, these are all false-fronted buildings. This at one time was a college, private one, but today it's the museum and city hall. You'll note the boardwalk sidewalks. And this is the Red Onion Saloon. Now, Bob and Jennifer ate here. We were told that the population year-round is 700. but it grows tremendously during the summer months when all the cruise ships are here. We met a number of young kids who came from all around Alaska and Canada to work here. This is the White Pass and Yukon Railroad Station. This is a saloon exhibit in the National Park Service's Visitor Center, and it offered a real good look at the turn-of-the-century life. Now, right adjacent to this, in a building that the National Park Service had, they showed a film on the gold rush, and it was marvelous. And we'll show you excerpts of it as soon as we go to our hotel, which is the Westmark, and it's right here. Well, we dropped some stuff off and then went to see the film.
Headlines in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer gave glittering hope for a country in economic depression. Gold, 68 rich men, stacks of yellow metal. The steamer Portland arrived in Seattle carrying nearly 2 tons of Klondike gold. Overnight, the rush was on. Nearly every available ship was pressed into service. Hopeful stampeders crowded the docks of Seattle, booking passage north. In total, 100,000 men and women would start the brave journey to the Klondike. Captain William Moore's homestead in Skagway was quickly overrun by stampeders, and the name changed from Mooresville to Skagway. Almost overnight, Skagway was a boom town of 1,000 Klondikers, readying for their trip to the gold fields. By the summer of 1898, Skagway was temporary home to some 15,000 men, women, and children. Skagway was gateway to the Klondike via White Pass, a torturous 40-mile route to Lake Bennett. Canadian Mounties required that stampeders carry a year's worth of supplies into the Klondike. A one-year outfit for one miner included 500 pounds of flour, 100 pounds of sugar, 80 pounds of beans, 75 pounds of bacon, 20 pounds of coffee, in all 1,000 pounds of food and 1,000 pounds of gear per person. One way or another, it had to be carried to the Klondike. Due to trail conditions, White Pass was frequently impassable for man and beast. The pack horses were abused, overworked, and starved. Nearly all of the horses, between 2,000 and 3,000, eventually perished. Their carcasses littered the trail and gave it a new name, the Dead Horse Trail. This is Dyea. In 1897, this was the favored dropping-off point for the journey to the Klondike. Early arrivals and their equipment were literally dumped in the mud flats. The 2,000 pounds of gear had to be hauled to dry ground before the rising tide claimed it all. By the fall of 1897, a wharf extended out at Dyea, reducing the difficulty of getting to shore. But the trail ahead would test the mettle of these stampeders as they hauled their supplies up and over the Chilkoot Pass. Dog teams and pack animals were used by those who could afford them. Even goats were pressed into service. But the final leg up the infamous Golden Staircase of Chilkoot Pass was made one step at a time. 70 feet of snow fell that winter of 1897. With heavy loads on their backs, an endless chain of stampeders trudged up the 1,500 steps leading to the summit. It might take a miner 30 or 40 trips up the Golden Staircase, and in all a month or more to haul supplies from Tidewater up and over the Chilkoot Pass. The physical hardships were compounded by the lawlessness along the trails. It was said to be at its worst at Skagway.
Good morning. It's Friday, about 6:30 a.m. We've already had breakfast, and our destination today is going to be Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory. And our journey will start by following the footsteps of the gold rushers as we travel to the White Pass summit on a vintage parlor car of this narrow-gauge White Pass and Yukon Route Railroad. As always, the others are ahead of me, waiting at the depot.
Morning. Well, trying to follow you guys around. Well, there's the train. And look who's up there. They're all right there in a row. Oh, how neat. I will tell you why we gathered you all together.
My name is Rebecca, and I'm going to be your narrator for the duration of this hour and 45-minute trip up to Fraser, British Columbia. We are going to be heading up 27.7 miles of narrow gauge track. And folks, we are in for a real treat today. The weather couldn't be better. I'm excited about some of the sights we're going to be seeing along the way. And speaking of sights, many of you found an All Aboard magazine located on your seat as you boarded. That All Aboard magazine is complimentary, and I encourage you to flip through that. In fact, on page 10 and 11 of that All Aboard magazine, you'll find a rail map. I'm going to be pointing out each and every one of those rail markers as we head up the track, so do follow along.
Well, look who's here. It's Holly Hemming. Now, Holly was with us for 9 days, and she's Holland American West Tour's tour director. And she really took care of us, all our travel details during our tour. What a neat person, and thank you, Holly. I'm sorry this is the only picture I have of you, so I had to stop it here and show it.
How are we doing today? Great. Thank you.
Good
to have you on board.
Is a water jug, and right next to it.
Well, this was a whistle stop. Some people got off, and they were going to take a trail up to this glacier.
To the narrow granite corridor. In fact, this section alone was one of the most 1,000. You can imagine each one of those carrying on not only their 2,000 pounds of supplies, but pack animals, one right after the other. How quickly that trail would have become dilapidated and muddy, borrowed a bit of money. And he did just that. But it wasn't long before the Wright Pass came through to lay the rails for this railroad, and they bought out his...
Oh, whoa, oh, man. Boy, I got a good one of that. Yeah. Jeez, look at that.
Customs building, and it's located about 12 miles to the south of the actual border between the U.S. and Canada. Now, directly below that building, you'll see 6-foot-high letters reading "On to Alaska with Buchanan." Buchanan was a rich coal baron from Michigan, and Buchanan had a heart not only for this wild frontier of Alaska, but he also had a heart for inner-city kids. And
those flowers are something else.
Well, the train is now passing 1,000 feet over Glacier Gorge. And as we go into the darkness of this tunnel, let's step back in time.
This rare film footage of the route, taken by Thomas Edison in 1901, testifies to the courage of the workmen. An immense amount of blasting was needed to cut the roadbed along the sheer rock walls above the Dead Horse Trail. Over 450 tons of explosives were used, mostly black powder. The placements often reached only by hanging perilously over the gorge on ropes to drill the charges. These were men of almost unimaginable courage, risking their lives on a daily basis to build the line, swinging over empty space with their dangerous cargo of explosives. After a blast, The men frequently had to climb back down the hill and clear the bracket road of debris by hand. Progress was slow and tedious.
Incredible day. Our brakeman Mike Terry just pointed out a few puffs of white cloud. But tucked in and behind the site we don't often get to see is the Chilkat Mountain Range. That section there is known as the Cathedral Peak. It's absolutely incredible. In fact, I brought my own camera, so I'm making sure to get a few shots here and there. 115 feet above that canyon floor. Steel cantilever bridge, however, was retired back in 1969, so we won't be heading over that today, thank goodness. Its structure was weakened immensely due to the heavy loads of ore, both zinc and iron ore pulled over it.
I thought we were going on it.
Instead, we'll be rolling over the replacement bridge that was built back in 69 and heading into the second and final of our tunnel. This one spans a little under 700 feet in length, and as you know, the first one it does get quite dark, so make sure you're sitting next to someone that you really, really like.
By the way, this railroad is among only 29 engineering feats in the world to have been declared an International Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. It shares this distinction with the Panama Canal, the Eiffel Tower, and the Statue of Liberty.
Okay, here we go in the tunnel. The tunnel.
Right after you get a glimpse of those mountains, keep looking off on your left and you'll see that that canyon has just about joined us. See if you can make out what little remains of that trail that over thousands and thousands of stampeders took a little over 102 years ago. There is a very narrow ledge etched in the side.
There's trail mesh.
Yeah, see the ledge? See the ledge going along there?
Now, Dead Horse Gulch is so named for the 3,000 horses that were driven to their deaths by the back-breaking loads on the Trail of 98. Let's again step back in time.
Horse savvy and tremendous impatience, the Klondikers subjected their animals to extreme brutalities. Jack London said of the scene, men shot them, worked them to death, and when they were gone, went back to the beach and bought more. Their hearts turned to stone, those that did not break, and they became beasts in the van of the Dead Horse Trail.
Well, this brings us to White Pass Summit, 2,865 feet, and it marks the border between Alaska and British Columbia, Canada. Our train ride came to an end here, since we had gone from Skagway to Fraser. Now, from Fraser, we would be getting on a bus and traveling to Whitehorse. Well, our bus turned out to be the Alaskan Yukon Explorer, a 60-foot vehicle. Beautiful. And here's our driver, John.
22,000 of those folks live in Whitehorse, which is just one small area the town will be staying in tonight.
Well, from Fraser, we just followed the scenic Klondike Highway. We came to a charming town called Carcross. It was originally a Tagish Indian hunting camp, and it was renamed Caribou Crossing by the gold rushers who stampeded through this village. Now the old hotel there, Caribou Hotel, it opened in 1898 and is the oldest hotel in the Yukon. We then stopped here for a photo opportunity. It's Emerald Lake, and it owes its blue-green color to copper leaching in from the surrounding mountains. Then it was on to Miles Canyon, where hundreds of stampeders capsized their crude boats in the Whitehorse Rapids. Then down the road at the foot of the rapids is Whitehorse, Yukon's largest city. We'll be staying the night here at one of the Westmark hotels. And that evening, we went to the Gay 90s Vaudeville Review. It featured a number of professional actors, dancers, and musicians. Had a lot of fun. Some hilarious bits in that show. And then it was up the next morning, and we would be traveling to Beaver Creek today to set the stage for our 300-mile trip today. Let's go back in time and see why the Alaskan Highway was built and the struggle they had in building it.
But that all changed when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. When Japan's forces landed on the Aleutian Islands in June of 1942, the U.S. military feared that if they couldn't be stopped, an attempt would be made to conquer the entire West Coast. Luckily, a northern defense strategy that focused on Alaska was already underway. In addition to placing Army bases in the Alaskan interior, a key element in this defense strategy was a road linking the U.S., the Western Canadian Territories, and the Territory of Alaska. This would be the most reasonable way of getting tons and tons of supplies north. In April of 1942, 7 regiments totaling 11,000 U.S. soldiers had begun punching a road through lingering winter snowdrifts. Surveyors encountered forested areas so thick with underbrush that it could take them hours to walk a mile. Strategically, the road was designed and built in 5 sections, with construction hubs in Dawson Creek, Whitehorse, Fairbanks, and the Alaskan port city of Valdez. When it came to the actual construction of what was first called the Alaska-Canada Highway, time was of the essence. The road was pushed forward as rapidly as possible. Today, environmentalists would protest such an assault on the wilderness. But with the threat of a Japanese invasion being a very real danger, speed of construction was considered more important than any environmental concerns. In some areas, bulldozers and steam shovels would only penetrate a few feet before hitting permafrost. The problem wasn't so much that the ground was frozen, but that it wouldn't stay that way. When permafrost is exposed to the sun, it melts, becoming a hopeless muck, and a potential danger to anything that moves on 2 feet, 4 legs, or any number of wheels. Then there were the working conditions. While it often hovered at 50 below zero for weeks during the winter, the temperature along the Alaska Highway route could rise to more than 100 degrees when summer rolled around. Wild bear and moose could unexpectedly stroll into work sites, and Alaska's famous and fearless mosquitoes, wasps, no-see-ums, and biting flies sometimes descended on the men in clouds. But summer and winter, the work continued. The hours were long, rations were short, and equipment was often insufficient against the harsh wilderness conditions. But occasionally there were light moments, mostly when new strange-looking vehicles appeared. Part of the continuous experimenting going on to find ways to speed up construction. For most of the men, working as road crew laborer meant spending 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, working on the road. Everyone suffered from the effects of primitive housing and army food, the heat of summer, and the frigid storms of winter. A few men perished from exposure and exhaustion. But like workers who had come north to build the Trans-Alaska Pipeline 30 years later, steady pay and high adventure compensated most for the hardships they endured. With $1 a day in wages, plus the free, even if limited, room and board, the pay seemed good for those who had previously been idled by America's Great Depression. Amazingly, after only 8 months, the first trail was through, and on November 20th, 1942, a road completion ceremony was held, opening this vital transportation link. With military and civilian contingents present, Alaska's congressional representative Bob Bartlett and Canadian Minister Ian McKenzie held a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and a flood of military transport vehicles began moving supplies north. Although it was officially open, work on the Alaska-Canada Highway, now named the Alcan, had just begun. It was a frontier road, barely passable, a narrow dirt trail that was often so muddy it could only be used by military-grade vehicles most of the year. To be useful over the long term, it had to be upgraded to an all-weather, all-season road. Thus, work continued. American and Canadian crews carried on, straightening curves, lowering grades, and improving surfaces, efforts that are still continuing.
Now let's pick up where we were. We're on the Alaskan or Alcan Highway, enjoying the sights as we are heading to remote Beaver Creek, which is but a wide spot in the road. We'll stay the night at another Holland American-owned Westmark hotel. Along the way, we stopped here because someone shouted out, "Bear ahead on the right side." Jennifer took this picture just after the bear scampered off. Well, that night, we went to a rousing Yukon rendezvous dinner show entitled 301 Miles from Nowhere. And we were extremely fortunate to dine that evening with Chris here and with Catherine and John Trim. Well, the show started off with the lead singer cast as a bush pilot, and he dropped in, and I mean dropped in. Later in the show, he selected Lois to sing to. She claimed she didn't enjoy it. But say, look at her face. You be the judge. After the show, we went to bed, and it was an awfully short night because we were up bright and early the next morning. It was Sunday, and we would travel 320 miles on the Alaskan Highway from Beaver Creek to Fairbanks, arriving around 6 p.m. So let's get on the road. Well, the roadway wasn't quite as bad as what I thought it would be, although there was a lot of potholes, and we had even a song called The Pothole. We were told that the boggy ground shifts and heaves during the winter, which causes the road to buckle and crack during the spring. As a result, we encountered a lot of construction traffic, detours, and sections covered with gravel. This was one area where they had a number of cars in a procession there, And we got off to the side, and look, here, there was a kind of a lonely wolf there, kind of a scraggly one. And right there, you can see the territorial flower of the Yukon, which is the fireweed. And it has seeds that fly like dandelion fluff. The appearance of this fluff is a sign that winter is on its way. Thus the natives use it as a calendar. And here we are with a sign welcoming us to Alaska. This was the spot that our tour director, Holly, said, let's take our group tour photo. She's the one in the red jacket to the right there. Had a good idea. Actually, everybody with cameras put them on a bench, and then they had one person take pictures with your own camera, which I thought was awfully good. Just opposite the Alaskan sign was this Welcome to the Yukon sign. Well, then it was back on the bus, and about a quarter of a mile north, we officially entered Alaska, the 49th state. And there's a monument and a 20-foot wide cut through the forest, which marked the actual line. Now there's the monument, and there's Betty and Len standing by it, and you can see that 20-foot cut. That was clear on both sides of the road. And here's Len. He went down to check out how spongy the tundra was. And then there was this plaque there that I thought was neat. It so states that this unfortified boundary line between the Dominion of Canada and the United States of America should quicken the remembrance of the more than a century-old friendship between these countries, a lesson of peace to all nations. Amen. This was erected in the May 31st, 1932. Then it's onward through the border station on our way to Tok, which is the first sizable village on the American side of the border. Has, around 900 people. And we're traveling on this Yukon Explorer, which is a 60-foot long bus with that very unique articulated section there in the rear. And inside of it, it had tables, and you could sit there and have something to drink. Holly certainly treated us good back there. Thanks, Holly. Now, along the way, most of the trees in this area are narrow conifers that look like carefully broomed Christmas trees. Hey, there's Betty, and she's smiling. Must be something good going to happen. Well, you're right. We stopped at Rita's for lunch. And we always smile when there's lunch. Well, after lunch, we got back on the road, and we arrived at Tok, which is the self-proclaimed dog mushing capital of Alaska. Stayed there a couple of hours, and then we headed north and arrived at Fairbanks around 6 p.m. We'll be staying here 2 nights at another Westmark Hotel right in downtown Fairbanks. Now, Fairbanks has a population of around 70,000, and it's located there on the Chena River. Since it's near the geographical center of Alaska, it's a major visitor center and the northern terminus of the Alaska Railroad. It's also the supply point for Arctic oil operations, and the University of Alaska is located right there in the city. And that's where Holly, our tour guide, goes to school. Now the next day, we got up and we're off on a riverboat cruise down the Chenna and Tanana rivers. And here we are at the riverboat. Hey, there's an umbrella, and look who's under it. It's Brother Len. Yeah, it was sprinkling somewhat, but that didn't dampen our enthusiasm. So now let's go aboard, and we'll see what they have to say.
We're happy to have you here.
From May through September, the Discovery 3 takes passengers down the Chena River out to the glacier-fed Tanana River on a round trip full of history and views of the magnificent Alaskan wilderness. Stern-wheelers are remarkable boats, and nobody knows more about them than Captain Jim Binkley.
Howdy, I'm Captain Jim Binkley of the Riverboat Discovery. Our family has been riverboating in Canada and Alaska for the past 97 years. There are 20 members of the Binkley family, 17 of whom work in the business. We have been operating stern-wheelers for passenger traffic in this area since 1950. Back in the early days, during the gold rush, there were about 250 stern-wheelers operating up and down the Yukon River and its tributaries. In my day, late 30s, early 40s, there were 9 stern-wheelers operating here in the interior. Today, there's only one, Discovery number 3, that's operating here on the Chena River. The stern-wheeler is a particular type of vessel made for real shallow draft and swift water. The paddle wheel itself is above the bottom of the boat. As a result, when you're getting close to the bottom, you're not going to foul as you would with a propeller boat. Stern-wheelers are difficult to handle, but in some ways they're easy to handle because they have a tremendous amount of power and remarkably fine steering. There's only about 3 feet of the boat in the water and about 40 feet of it above the water. So the biggest consideration we have is the wind outside of the current. And then the channel changes on us just about every day. So a pilot must learn to read the patterns on the surface of the river to find that channel. It's a constant challenge, but a stern-wheeler itself, there's nothing like it in the world.
Today, Captain Binkley's sons pilot the Discovery 3, and his grandchildren are actively training to become a 4th generation of riverboat captains on the Chena River. In Alaska, bush pilots are as common as taxi cabs in New York. Here, bush pilot Bill Johnson takes off from a 900-foot grass and gravel airstrip.
This was very interesting.
This stern-wheeler is Discovery 1, built in 1955 and piloted for over 30 years by Captain Jim. The Chena Pump House is a National Historic Site and is one of the first attractions as you paddle wheel down the Chena River. Today, the Pump House is one of Fairbanks' more popular restaurants. But in the 1930s through the 50s, it supplied water for nearby gold mines. As you continue down the river, you'll enjoy a unique perspective on how Alaskans live. All manner of dwellings have been raised along the riverbank. Whether it's a hand-hewn log cabin or a modern mansion in the wilderness, all of these homes must withstand winter temperatures down to 50 below and summers in the 90s. Sled dogs are also very much a part of Alaskan life. And there's no better person to tell you about mushing than Susan Butcher. Susan is a champion of the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race. The Iditarod is a 1,000-mile race taking mushers and their dog teams from Anchorage to Nome, following the historic Iditarod Gold Rush Trail. Susan has won the race an amazing 4 times, more than all but one other musher. These dogs are bred especially for running long distances in interior Alaska's extreme winters. Susan's here to show off her kennel's latest litter of racing huskies, and maybe a couple of race veterans as well.
Thank you so much for stopping and chatting with us on the river. Dave, Mark, we'll see you downriver. Thank you,
Where the Chena River meets the mighty Tanana, you can see the natural event the area natives call Nuchalawoya, or Marriage of the Waters. As the clear water of the Chena mixes with the glacial silt of the Tanana, the mixing produces a cloud-like image in the water. It's a hypnotic effect, and one visitors are sure to remember. Fish wheels like this one used to be a common sight along Alaska's rivers. The fish wheels were used for many years, but were actually too efficient and were outlawed in territorial days. Today they are still used by a small number of subsistence and commercial fishermen. Here, Dixie Alexander, an Athabascan Indian, prepares a chum salmon for drying or smoking in the traditional manner.
Now, here is the very same Dixie Alexander on the day we were there. You can see her rain gear. Well, midway through the trip, the paddle wheelers stopped, and most everyone went ashore at this old Chena Indian village. Lots of umbrellas. Well, this village has been carefully recreated to give us a glimpse of village life in Alaska. Now, here are some pictures that Jennifer and Betty took, showing the animal hides, which the Indians highly prized for clothing and trading. And here are the sled dogs. They gave a demonstration there. Then it was back on the stern wheeler and back to the dock, and this completed our trip. Now, Fairbanks has always been a boom town. The most recent, however, came in the form of a 48-inch diameter pipe, the transatlantic pipeline shown here. This amazing structure skirts the city of Fairbanks, and it cost $8 billion to construct. It was built in the 1970s following the discovery of oil in Prudhoe Bay. It's 800 miles long and is one of the largest pipeline systems in the world. It delivers more than 20% of the United States domestic oil production. And these vertical supports here, there's 78,000 of those, 11 pump stations, and the flow rate is slightly over 1 million barrels of oil a day. Interesting enough, it takes 6 days for the oil to travel the 800 miles. The pipeline stretches from Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope through some of the harshest terrain in the world to Valdez, the northernmost ice-free port in North America. And this is the route it takes. Those circles are pumping stations. And the oil temperature starts out at about 116 degrees Fahrenheit at Prudhoe Bay and ends up at 82 degrees Fahrenheit at the Valdez Terminal. Now here are some pictures of the pipeline. There, of course, is in the snow. And it crosses more than 800 rivers and streams. That's a 2,000-foot bridge there. And here it is at Valdez, and you can see the tankers getting ready to take on the oil. We then visited Gold Dredge number 8, an artifact of the pre-World War II boom period in Alaskan gold mining. The dredge was described as a mechanical gold pan that took massive amounts of water, electricity, and workers to operate. During its 32 years of operation, the dredge only moved a distance of 4.5 miles, leaving a trail of rock debris behind. We then had the opportunity to pan for gold. After finding our poke of gold, we browsed through a gift shop, and the gold was weighed, and it was worth $16, and Lois purchased a pendant to place the gold into. Now, prior to going aboard Dredge number 8, we had lunch right there, served family style in the dining hall. It was miner stew, and it was good. Then we went back to the hotel, had dinner, and then we went out here to see Mary Shields. She's a dog musher and the first woman to finish the Iditarod sled dog race from Anchorage to Nome. Now, we had a great time. She really shared the love of dogs with 15 of us visitors. There's Betty with Mary. Now, she has traveled cross-country with her dog team for over 20 years, sometimes just for the joy of camping and exploring, and sometimes for the challenge of racing. As in the Iditarod, the Yukon Quest, and the Hope 91 race in the Soviet Far East. There is a little tent that she uses when she's out in the woods. And there's Lois and I standing in front of her home, which had a sod roof, and it was built by she and her husband some years ago. She's now divorced, but her husband did beautiful work. As you can see inside, it was really neat. Here we are in the kitchen, and by the way, she made great brownies to serve to us. It was a delightful evening. Now, Mary had some books and a video for sale. We bought one of the books. When we got home, was so taken by the book that we sent off for this video called The Season of the Sled Dog. It's 60 minutes long. It's a great one, and in it, she asked that we not reproduce it. And I'm not going to. I'm just going to give you a few excerpts from it, hopefully to get you enticed to send off for it. And I'll have where to send at the end of this video.
These sled dogs are not house pets. They are working animals, and they work hard for their living, and they love their work. Sled dogs are creatures of the snow and the cold and the moonlight. Hours ago, 2 other creatures arose to share that snow and that cold and that moonlight. Like my dogs, I too love winter best. Most mushers do. Why else would we choose to live on the 64th parallel, where winter rules from October through April? I love starting out my day by going out and making the rounds of the dog yard.
Wake up, guys! Here it comes!
My dogs take good care of me, and I try to take good care of them. I give them plenty of food, water, and TLC, and for me that works. Every musher has a different way of relating to his or her dogs. These dogs are some of my best friends. We spend many hours a day on the trail together. For me, it makes sense to share that time with good friends. Take my friend here, Little Joe. He's one of my favorites. But then again, I have 13 favorites, each for a different reason. Little Joe is a mixed breed husky, bred more for his working qualities than for show. Most sled dogs are not purebred dogs, but a conglomeration of bloodlines constantly evolving to fill the demands of the mushers who breed them. Little Joe is a large freighting dog. He weighs about 90 pounds. He has just the build I'm looking for in sled dogs, long legs and a rangy body. In deep snow, Joe's the dog to have breaking trail. Joe's feet are compact. The toes fit neatly together with stiff, bristly hair between them. Little Joe has a dense double coat with stiff guard hairs and a soft, downy undercoat. This combination protects him even at 60 below zero. But Little Joe's most impressive quality is his spirit, his intense desire to work hard pulling a sled. Big Joe, Little Joe's father, had that same desire. He'd work his heart out for you. A good attitude is the most important trait to select for in breeding sled dogs. Build a home with our hands and the resources of the woods around us, to fetch our own water, gather our own firewood, search for the bright berries in late summer and a fat, careless moose in the fall. This life has lessons to teach. The dogs do a lot of work for us, but in our turn, we do a lot of work for the dogs. The team is a 365-day-a-year responsibility, and they deserve the best care we can give them. Just like the rest of us, the dogs need food, water, shelter, exercise, and attention. Buying the dog food is a major expense, running about $1 a day a dog. We buy dog food by the ton, some years using commercially prepared feed, and other years cooking ground barley to mix with fish meal and fat. Ready for that? The lead dog sets the pace for the rest of the team, so it's best to have one of your fastest dogs in this position. Schnitzel is 7 years old now, and he has to work a little harder to stay out in front of the younger dogs. There are no reins attached to the team, just a few vocal commands to tell the lead dog what you want him to do. To turn right, I say, Jeep, Jeep. When I want to go back in the same direction I just came from, I give the command, Come ha! Come ha, Schnitzel! Come ha! This is handy if you drop a mitten or miss a turn on the trail. To stop the team, the command is, Whoa! I won't tell you what I holler when they don't stop. Easy. Hear that little... That gets the dogs going, but it almost got me in big trouble once. I had 12 dogs harnessed up to go. John kissed me goodbye, and the dogs mistook the of the kiss for the to go. I just barely grabbed the sled as they zoomed by. Haw is the command to turn to the left, and my dogs, they'll turn on a dime.
Ha! Ha! Schnitzel! Ha! Ha! Attaboy! Ha!
Well, that time the dime must have been covered with snow. to learn several important lessons before she's ready to race. First of all, she must learn to drink before her water freezes solid. To encourage her, I add dog food to her water, but it doesn't always work. Second, she must learn to rest in harness and not chew on the lines. Finally, Flopsy must learn to wear booties. Dogs don't like things strapped on their feet, so it's important to make this introduction before the race. Booties are used to protect the dog's tender pads from rough trail conditions, and with proper care, sore feet can actually heal on the trail. During a long-distance race, a dog musher will use anywhere from 600 to 1,000 booties. To pay for things like booties, most mushers seek sponsors to help support their race effort. In December, sunlight is a precious commodity in interior Alaska. On December 21st, the winter solstice, we get about 4 hours of daylight. Hardly enough time to do all that needs to be done before the big race. I like the adventure of a 1,000-mile wilderness trek. Oh, sure, I'm too tired and too cold to really experience the country with all my senses, but there's a basic contentment in being there. The misery, it's expected. All the rest that comes along, that's a surprise. And the biggest surprise is suddenly waking up and it's the morning of the race. It's time to load the dogs in their truck and head downtown to Fairbanks. The dogs jump into the truck as they've done before, not knowing they'll run 1,000 miles before they see that truck again. As we wait for our starting number to be called, the veterans on the team seem to remember the excitement. But the young dogs, the rookies, they're all wide-eyed and excited. Me too.
Scott Coles is next. Yeah, Mary's smiling already. She's having a good time down there. Dogs are all ready to go. Some of hers look pretty calm. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go, Mary. Mary is off in the 1988 class.
Well, after a very good evening spent with Mary Shields, we went back to the hotel, and we would be departing Fairbanks the next morning for Denali National Park. We're going to be going on the McKinley Explorer Dome rail cars. It's a 122-mile ride via the train. Upon arriving in the park, the first thing we did was to take a natural history tour of Denali. And here we are on the first stretch of the road, and it cut through a stunted spruce forest. We were told that in the harsh subarctic climate, both the white and black spruce grow slowly. The small trees you see here are really quite old. Now, the willow ptarmigan is Alaska's state bird. We saw a couple of them. Now, the open road that we were traveling on ended here at the Savage River checkpoint. Only buses and private vehicles with passes could be driven past the checkpoint. Travel was, of course, restricted to protect the fragile wilderness. This is the Alaska fireweed, and it's said that when the last pink blossom is scattered by the wind, Alaska's short summer is over. We were told that the park road was built in the 20s and 30s and follows the caribou migration trail. Hence, the chances of seeing caribou from the road are extremely good, and that's exactly what happened. As you can see here, these are some photographs taken by both Betty and Jennifer of some caribou just lying right close to the road. They didn't seem to stir much when we stopped and took a look at them. Beautiful animals. Here are some more pictures of the sights that we've seen as we drove further into the park. We probably went in around 30, 35 miles. Here's Bob and Jennifer, just enjoying the day and the beauty of it all. And this was right at the last stop that we made. We turned here. Beautiful sight. Now let's hear a little of the history of the park, how it got started and how old it is.
Denali was set aside as a national park more than 40 years before Alaska became America's 49th state. But it was the Athabascan Indians who first recognized the area's rare quality. It was probably 1500 BC when Athabascans came to hunt and live here. They believed the mountain was the home of the sun. 1905. 2,000 gold miners rushed the Kantishna Hills. 1907. Wealthy hunter-naturalist Charles Sheldon began exploring the wilderness, collecting specimens for the American Museum of Natural History. Assisted by Alaskan pioneer Harry Karstens. Witnessing what Sheldon described as the wholesale slaughter of Alaska wildlife, Sheldon lobbied Congress to make the area a national park. His vision was realized in February 1917. In 1980, the park boundaries were expanded to 6 million acres for the protection of animals, and the name was changed to Denali National Park and Preserve. As early as 1916, Maurice Marino homesteaded the area and built a roadhouse. It became a popular drinking hangout for miners in the winter. As seen here in 1925, an old railroad car became a park station. A park superintendent's office was built. Trains were running to the park. President Harding drove the Golden Spike at Nenana on July 15, 1923. The Alaska Railroad had been completed between Seward and Fairbanks. The railroad and the park were growing. Dog sled patrols were established by Superintendent Karstens, an experienced musher. Poaching was rampant in the park, but as word spread of the dog sled patrols, poachers got wise and moved out. Hotel began in 1938. Money was tight. The hotel would be comfortable but plain. So plain that after a visit there, Interior Secretary Harold Ickes described it as looking like a factory. In 1942, American soldiers were sent to protect the territory of Alaska from Japanese attack. The hotel was temporarily turned over to the military. During winter months, soldiers were sent into the sub-zero twilight to test cold weather gear. They also got some much-needed rest and relaxation, taking time to enjoy winter activities like these.
Here we are heading back to our lodge, and somebody yelled bear, and Jennifer was quick enough to get this picture of it. A little hard to see, it was eating berries. But then in front of our bus was this fox. He was just sauntering on down the road. And here's another picture that Jennifer took of that fox. Well, it was back to the lodge, and we had dinner that night. Woke up the next morning. It was a real nice day, and we all had trips planned that morning, each of them a little different. Jennifer and Bob would be taking a Whitewater Canyon run, a 2-hour trip down the Nenana River. Here they are. They had a blast. They went 11 miles down the river, and they went through rapids named Cable Car, Coffee Grinder, and Ice Worm. Jennifer took these pictures using a little waterproof throwaway camera, and you can see why it was a throwaway and waterproof one, can't you? Now, Betty and Len, they took what was called a McKinley Run, and it was, again, a 2-hour trip. It went through the most scenic portion of the river, and they thoroughly enjoyed that trip too. Lois and I, we took a trip that was called Denali Wilderness Safari, and it was viewing 25 miles of scenic wilderness in a jet boat with a stop at a trapper's work camp. By the way, as we were heading to the boat, there was a moose standing in the water, just like this one here. And there's the jet boat. We panned for gold and had a great time. We all met up at McKinley Village Resort, where we had lunch. That's where we were staying. And again, that's a view looking out of our room. Well, at noon, we boarded a train to Anchorage. It was a 240-mile trip in a domed rail car called the McKinley Explorer. It would take us 8 hours, and there'd be no stops. Hey, it was great. You can see us grinning there. Now, Holland American and Princess each have their own dome cars. Those to the right there are Holland Americans, and that one to the left is the Princess car. And look at this. There's Mount McKinley. It was gorgeous, and what a gorgeous day it was. Now, they say that clouds hide that summit about 75% of the time in the summer and 60% of the time in the rest of the year. But let me tell you, it was beautiful that day. And as you'll see, all our photographers took a lot of pictures of Mount McKinley. And it was so nice because we could see it for quite a distance. Well, most of us could see it. My brother went to sleep here, I think, or he's studying awfully hard. Well, there's another picture of Mount McKinley, the highest peak in North America. And actually, Mount McKinley, of course, is known as Denali, the Great One, or the High One, but it really has two peaks. South Peak, the true summit, and 2 miles away at 19,400 feet is North Peak. Most of the mountain is covered by ice and snow all year round. What a gorgeous view. Well, it's approaching about 5 p.m., so we went downstairs to the dining car. And we had a very elegant dinner. And we had some good friends and relatives to share it with. The dining car, I believe, sat around 16 to 18 people. You can see Mount McKinley there. We were about 35 miles away, and you could still see it. Hey, brother, are you still sleeping? Now, it was quite amusing and interesting. We pulled into a station, and opposite was another dome car. And look at this, gave the moose call. Now, thanks, Chris, for capturing this. And hey, my brother's awake. I see him there, and he's giving the moose call. Good for you, Len. What can you say other than it was a spectacular ride on the Alaskan Railroad through some beautiful country? The 8 hours went so fast. And here we are. It's now about 8:30 p.m. and it's still light, and we're coming into Anchorage. We'll be here 2 nights, and we're going to be put up over here at the Hilton, one of the 2 high-rises there on the right. Now, since Anchorage will be our last city on this tour, we will be spending 2 nights here. Tomorrow we'll get up. It'll be day 8 of our land-based tour. And we'll start off by just walking around the city, enjoying the sights. And now Anchorage is Alaska's largest city and is home to almost half of the state's residents. It's located on a high bluff and folded by the 2 branches of the Cook Inlet. It lies as far west as the Hawaiian Islands and as far north as Helsinki, Finland. The protective mountain barrier and the proximity to the ocean afford Anchorage a surprisingly moderate climate relative to most Alaska. Well, we had breakfast right there on the main street and went across and looked at this monument, which was not only to commemorate the Iditarod, but the 1925 event in which 20 mushers relayed serum to Nome, Alaska to save children who contracted diphtheria. Now, Anchorage has the distinction of having both the busiest private plane airport in the United States as well as the busiest float plane airport in the United States, right here at Lake Hood. Well, that afternoon, we boarded a bus and went over here to the Alyeska Resort, which offers Olympic-quality alpine skiing and tram rides. And the tram ride was available all year round. Skiing is from about mid-November through April. Well, we went to the summit, and we had lunch there, and what a spectacular view we had, not only of the snow-covered mountain, but also of the valley and Turnagain Arm. Now, the summit's elevation is 3,939 feet. The base elevation is 250 feet. At the top, the average snowfall is 583 inches. That's natural snow. And there's 62 runs. And there's a view of the hotel, which is an upscale hotel. It's the Westin Prince Hotel. And from here, we went to the Portage Glacier, which is the most well-known of the valley's 5 glaciers. It's about 50 miles from Anchorage. Our first stop was here at the Visitor Center, where we looked at some neat displays and then watched a wonderful video called Voices from the Ice. And
it is here among the high arches of the Earth's crust that they are born, in these places frigid and remote, barriers to moisture from the North Pacific. During the past 2 million years, their kind has dominated nearly 1/3 of the total land area of this planet. Humankind has called them glaciers. They are rivers of ice, and their movement contains the power to carve great valleys. As they move, they speak to us with the sounds of their labor. These are the sounds of their life and their death. the frozen breath of the ocean from which glaciers are created. They are the first step in the process of continual change, continual beginnings. Storm after storm, layer by layer, the flakes accumulate. Time and pressure fuse them together, compressing the snow into dense, jewel-like ice. Under the increasing weight of each new snow, the ice moves down slope, like a river, forming a flowing sheet hundreds or even thousands of feet thick. In the Chugach Mountains of south central Alaska, vast rivers of ice have flowed through the course of many ice ages. In recent geologic times, much of this area was covered by glacial ice half a mile thick. Today, these mountains are still the domain of active glaciers. About 1/3 of the Chugach National Forest is still under the domination of moving ice. In the tradition of their immense ancestors, these glaciers are master sculptors of the landscape. Living symbols of the forces of change and transformation, they return to the sea from which they came. Ice breaks off and melts. This may happen faster than the glacier's movement as it flows down the valley. The glacier gets smaller. Because glaciers are slowly shrinking throughout the northern hemisphere, they tell us of a warming trend in the Earth's atmosphere, which can be detected in no other way. The glacier's surface is a surreal landscape of icy spires and crevasses. These crevasses are so deep that a 10-story building could be hidden within them. These are the facial expressions of the tremendous pressure and stress within a glacier as it moves over the uneven terrain. Is imperceptible to our normal vision. Feet per day is the normal speed of travel. Near the glacier, its monstrous weight can be heard grinding across the land. These are the sounds of a battle between rock and ice, the voices of a struggle nearly as ancient as the Earth itself. The exposed bedrock over which the glacier once passed gives mute evidence of the power of the moving ice. As the glacier transforms the land beneath it, the ice itself is eroding away on the front of the glacier, yielding to the force of sunlight and warmer temperatures. Meltwater flows under and through the glacier, creating caves of exquisite architecture and unfamiliar beauty. As the sun sets, one of the most uniquely adapted forms of life in this cold environment slowly prepares to make an appearance. Although most plants and animals depend on the retreat of glaciers to make habitat available to them, there is one creature whose life unfolds on the snow itself. The ice worm is a creature of such myth and mystery that many people do not believe in its existence. They live between snow crystals near the surface of the glacier, emerging to the open air to feed on pollen carried by the wind. It is known that they are related to earthworms, but many details of their existence remain a mystery. The landscape unveiled by the retreat of a glacier is nearly as harsh as the ice itself. It will take only a few years for the first plants to inhabit this wasteland of barren rock. Their existence creates a thin veneer of soil, a carpet of nourishment, in which other plants soon flourish. With the advancement of time, the bleak landscape is transformed by an unfolding parade of new voices. Created by the melting of snow and glaciers, life flooded into the marsh, cradle and nursery for a myriad of species. As distant glaciers feed the marsh, a new generation of young emerges to begin life's oldest journey of discovery. Green forests invaded the valleys left by the retreating glaciers, became home to new forms of life, and filtered the meltwater streams, which became host to other species. Salmon return every year to these glacial gravels to deposit the seed of the next generation. It is here that these adult salmon began their life's journey, and here it will end. The rich land and forests left behind by the diminishing glaciers have also echoed to the sound of human voices. For thousands of years, native cultures lived along glacial rivers and open coastlines, sustained by an abundant supply of fish and wildlife. Prospectors followed the creeks and canyons which were left behind by the retreating glaciers, looking for quick wealth, easy riches. Sometimes they found it, but often the wealth they left behind in their machinery and labor was greater than the gold they found. The relics of their labor reached into the remotest parts of the landscape, supported by the forest as they went. And the land was abandoned, along with their claims and their dreams. After the turn of the century, men returned to expand their search for valuable metals with the more sophisticated technology of steam locomotives. They bravely pushed through an inhospitable environment and built monuments to their energy and daring. Today, the forest speaks to us still, reminding us of our past, the natural world, and perhaps a chance to know ourselves. A place for some of us to satisfy a deeply felt need for wildness. The forest continues to sustain a multitude of human needs, providing wood, paper, and fuel. These streams still issue their secret call to the salmon, a call we cannot hear. But their return to these forest streams each year provides a living for many Alaskans. And even today, miners still search the forest for precious minerals, scoured from the earth by the work of ancient glaciers. The forest is timeless, though constantly changing. Like the glaciers, it speaks to us of many moods and seasons. The glaciers are greatly diminished now. Because the Earth is in a warming period, many glaciers are melting faster than they are expanding. But still, they dominate these lands of coastal Alaska. And still we hear the roar of crashing ice from snows that fell decades ago. The history of our relationship with this landscape is profoundly influenced by the existence of glaciers. They are the sculpting tools of evolution's continuing art of creation. Millions of acres have emerged from under their domain as the Chugach National Forest. But in time, they will perhaps reclaim this rugged land once again.
We then boarded this motor vessel for a close-up look of the Portage Glacier. This is Portage Lake, and it's a picture that Jennifer took just prior to our boarding the vessel. You can see how calm the water was. What a serene place. And as we were heading towards the glacier, we passed several waterfalls that came down into the lake. Now, the Portage Glacier is the most well-known of the valley's 5 glaciers. And we were told during the last 80 years, the glacier calved large icebergs into the lake as it retreated. Now, that's the face of the Portage Glacier. And they said it still calves into the lake. However, we didn't see any large chunks of ice come plummeting into the water. We did see some small ones. Hey, there's Bob and Jennifer on the upper deck, just enjoying the sights. Now, there was a Forest Service interpreter on board, and she narrated the trip and pointed out a number of the landscape features. She did say that the lake was up to 800 feet deep. Well, we made several circles getting a good view of the lake, and there's a picture looking down into the water. And there's one of the ice caves. Now there's the Sang family and with Betty and Len, and we sure enjoyed visiting with them. Good traveling companions. As we headed back to the dock, the realization set in that this was the last organized event of our 12-day Holland American cruise tour. The chartered bus took us to our hotel, and that night the group gathered together for a farewell dinner and some goodbyes. For the next day, we would be flying home. Now, Lois and I want to thank each of you for your part in making our trip so enjoyable. We feel blessed to not only have had the opportunity to experience the wonders of Alaska and the Yukon Territory, but to have done so with strangers who became friends. We will long remember the beauty of Alaska, where nature's integrity still rules. We would be remiss if we didn't thank and acknowledge the following for their contributions to this video.